Hello students, welcome to the channel. In this video, we'll solve the second reading passage of the October 2020 US SAT. This is the history passage. This passage is adapted from a speech delivered in 1860 by John Hossack, speech of John Hossack, convicted of a violation of the fugitive slave law before Judge Drummond of the United States District Court, Chicago, Illinois. Hossack was tried for aiding an escaped African-American slave in violation of the Fugitive Slave Law of 1850. So the context here is of Hossack speaking before a judge because he has been arrested for violating the Fugitive Slave Law. And before the Civil War and the abolition of slavery, there was this law called the Fugitive Slave Law that mandated anybody in the North to return an escaped slave to his master in the South. So if a slave had escaped the South and come to the North, and somebody in the North, and obviously somebody here refers to a white person found this black man, then it was incumbent on the white person to return this black man back to slavery, back to the white master in the South. So here Hossack has helped an escaped African-American slave. He has refused to send him back to his white master, and so he's appearing before a court. I'm a foreigner. I was born among the rugged but free hills of Scotland, a land, sir, that never was conquered and where a slave never breathed. Let a slave set foot on that shore and his chains fall off forever, and he becomes what God made him, a man. In this far-off land, I heard of your free institutions, your prairie lands, your protected canals, and your growing towns. 22 years ago, I landed in this city. I then opened a prairie farm to get bread for my family, and I'm one of the men who have made Chicago what it is today, having shipped some of the first grain that was exported from this city. I am, sir, one of the pioneers of Illinois, who have gone through many of the hardships of the settlement of a new country. I have spent upon it my best days, the strength of my manhood. I have 11 children who are natives of this, my adopted country. No living man, sir, has greater interest in its welfare, and it is because I am opposed to carrying out wicked and ungodly laws and love the freedom of my country that I stand before you today. So in this introductory paragraph, Hossack introduces who he is. He's an immigrant from Scotland. So he has immigrated to the United States from there. And he starts by saying that Scotland is a land where there is no slavery. Anybody who comes to Scotland, and if he was a slave in his past life, immediately he becomes a free man. So there is no slavery in Scotland. And he came to the US because he had heard about its resources, its canals, its towns, its prairie lands. And he's one of the pioneers of the city of Chicago. He's one of the first people who exported grain from this city. And so he's deeply invested in the welfare of this country, right? He speaks about his children who were born in the US. And he says that I stand before you today because I've been arrested under a law that is ungodly, under a law that is unjust. And when a person is arrested, the person is arrested because he has done something that is antisocial. But Hossack is saying that what he has done is absolutely the opposite of that. He has done something which is meant for the welfare of his adopted country, right? So that is how he starts his argument. Sir, I ought not to be sentenced because, as has been argued by the prosecution, I am an abolitionist. I have no apologies to make for being an abolitionist. When I came to this country, like the mass from beyond the sea, I was a Democrat. There was a charm in the name. But sir, I soon found that I had to go beyond the name of a party in this country in order to know anything of its principles or practice. I soon found that however much the great parties of my adopted country differed upon banks, tariffs, and land questions, in one thing they agreed, in trying which could stoop the lowest to gain the favor of the most cursed system of slavery that ever swayed an iron rod over any nation. So he's saying that he's an abolitionist, which is to say that he's fighting for the cause of abolition of slavery. And he says that when he first came to this country, when he first came to the United States, he called himself a Democrat. And that was only because he found that name more charming than the other party, which was the Republican. But over time, he realized that on the fundamental issue of slavery, the Democrats and Republicans are not different. They're only different on things like banks and tariffs and land questions. But on the most cursed system of slavery that has ever swayed an iron rod, which is to say, that has ever completely taken control of a country, on that question, both parties have the same position. As a man who had fled from the crushing aristocracy of my native land, how could I support a worse aristocracy in this land? I was compelled to give my humble name and influence to a party who proposed at least to embrace in its sympathies all classes of men from all quarters of the globe. In this choice, I found myself in the company of Clarkson and Wilberforce, who were British abolitionists in my native land, and of Washington and Franklin in this boasted land of the free. And more than all these, the Redeemer on whom I humbly trust for acceptance with my God, who came to heal the brokenhearted, to preach deliverance to the captives, to set at liberty those who were bruised. Tell me, sir, with these views, can I be anything but an abolitionist? Surely for this I ought not to be sentenced. So here he speaks about his political background in Scotland, and he says that while there was no slavery in Scotland, it was obviously an aristocratic society in the sense that there was a king and there was nobility and then there was the common man. And he railed against that system of aristocracy. So when he came to the US and he found a worse form of aristocracy in the sense of slavery, in the sense of the white man taking ownership of the black man, how could he support that, right? He was influenced by British abolitionists as well as abolitionists in the United States. And he who believes that all men are equal in the eyes of God, I have come to heal the brokenhearted, which is to say the black slave, to preach deliverance to the captives, to set at liberty those who were bruised. So with these thoughts and with these ideas and with this background, what could I be but an abolitionist, and I should not be sentenced for my beliefs? Again, sir, I ought not to be sentenced because the fugitive slave law, under which I am torn from my family and business by the supple tools of the slave power, is at variance with both the spirit and letter of the Constitution. Sir, I place myself upon the Constitution in the presence of a nation who have the Declaration of Independence read to them every 4th of July and profess to believe it. Yes, in the presence of civilized man, I hold up the Constitution of my adopted country as clear from the blood of men and from a tyranny that would make crowned heads blush. So here he's speaking about why he's against the fugitive slave law, right? He says that he is against the fugitive slave law, primarily one, which he discussed earlier, that it is unjust, it is immoral, it doesn't agree with him to support a law that puts one class of men above another class of men. But also, if you look at the Constitution, the fugitive slave law is against the spirit of the Constitution. It is against the spirit of the Declaration of Independence that all of us profess allegiance to. I hold up the Constitution of my adopted country as clear from the blood of men and from a tyranny that would make crowned heads blush. So he's saying that part of the respect that I have for the Constitution is that it is a Constitution that is free from tyranny, the kind of tyranny that crowned heads, which is to say royals, command. The parties who bend the Constitution to the support of slavery are traitors, traitors not only to the liberties of millions of enslaved countrymen, but traitors to the Constitution itself that they have sworn to support. So he's saying that those who support slavery, those who support the ownership of the black man, are traitors. They are traitors not just to the idea of morality, and humanity, but they are traitors to the Constitution of the United States that speaks of the equality of all men. A foreigner upon your soil, I go not to the platforms of contending parties to find truth. I go, sir, to the Constitution of my country. The word slave is not to be found. I read, we, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice. Yes, sir, establish justice to promote the general welfare and to secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. So ordain and establish this Constitution of the United States of America. So he's saying that I do not go to either party. I do not go to the Democrats or the Republicans to confirm my views on slavery. I go to the Constitution. And the word slave is not to be found in the emblem. The emblem is all about protecting justice, protecting liberty. These were the men who had proclaimed to the world that all men were created equal, that they were endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and contended even unto death for 7 long years. Can it be, sir, that these great men, under cover of those hallowed words, intended to make a government that should outrage justice and trample upon liberty as no other government under the whole heavens has ever done? So he's saying when the founding fathers wrote the Constitution and they wrote these hallowed words, is it possible that they were writing these words, but they did not mean those words to be put into practice? Because what is happening in the US today is the absolute opposite of what those words intend to say. We have a system of slavery that goes against liberty of the black man, that goes against justice for the black man. So is it possible that the founding fathers wrote those beautiful words, but that they intended to form a government that tramples upon liberty the way no government has done so far? So this is the overall argument that Hossack makes before the judge in presenting his case of why he helped the fugitive slave and how he cannot return the slave to his master in the South, because that goes against his personal beliefs born of his past, his status as a Scot. He was born a Scot. His also his belief in the constitution of his adopted country that talks about equality of all men. Right? Okay. Question 11. The primary purpose of the passage is to convince the presiding judge that the fugitive slave law is in conflict with various state and local laws. The fugitive slave law does not apply to foreign-born residents such as Hossack. Hossack's contributions to his adopted country outweigh the illegality of his actions. Hossack's actions in service of the abolitionist cause should not be considered crimes. So it's D, right? He says that when I work as an abolitionist, I work out of my morality, out of my ideology, out of my sense of humanity, and I work in the spirit of what the Constitution says, so my work should not be considered a crime. Okay, he does not say that the fugitive slave law is in conflict with state and local laws, or that it should not apply to foreign-born residents, so that's wrong. And he does not say that his contributions outweigh the illegality of his actions. In fact, he says my actions are not illegal. What I have done is just and should not be considered illegal. Question 12, Hossack's descriptions of Scotland in lines 1 to 5 suggest that. So what is he saying in lines 1 to 5? I am a foreigner. I was born among the rugged but free hills of Scotland, a land, sir, that never was conquered, and where a slave never breathed. Let a slave set foot on that shore, and his chains fall off forever, and he becomes what God made him, a man. So this suggests that he sought greater freedom than his homeland offered. The values of his homeland shaped his love of freedom. His fear of financial insecurity prompted his emigration. He lacked faith in Scotland's justice system. So it's B, right? He says that he comes from a land where there was no slavery, and anybody who came to Scotland, even if he was a slave in his earlier life, immediately became free. And that is the base from which he speaks. Those are the values that shaped him. He didn't move to the US because he sought greater freedom. That was not something the passage mentions. And it was definitely not financial insecurity or lack of faith in the justice system. So B is the best answer. Okay, 13 and 14. Okay. Hosack's account of his experiences in Chicago in lines 8 to 15 primarily serves to. So lines 8 to 15 say, 22 years ago, I landed in this city. I then opened a prairie farm to get bread for my family, and I am one of the men who have made Chicago what it is today. Having shipped some of the first grain that was exported from this city, I am, sir, one of the pioneers of Illinois who have gone through many of the hardships of the settlement of a new country. I've spent upon it my best days, the strength of my manhood, and so on, right? So why does he speak all of this? It serves to emphasize the extent of his contribution to the US, highlight his role in helping boost American exports, justify his attempts to undermine destructive government policies, demonstrate that the court is obligated to be lenient towards him. So it's A, right? He is presenting the extent of his contribution to the US to say that he is interested as much in the welfare of the country as the next American. And so when he's accused of a crime, and so when he's accused of being antisocial, that should not be correct because he has made immense contributions to the United States. He doesn't bring this up to say that he has helped boost American exports. That's not what he's arguing. He's not saying that I want to undermine destructive government policies. He's only saying that he is against the fugitive slave law. So C is wrong. And he's not saying that be lenient towards me because I have contributed to America. He's saying that the law itself should not stand. So A. Hosack indicates that upon coming to the United States, he identified with the Democratic Party because, so we know that at the beginning, when he landed, he became a Democrat. There was a charm in the name, right? So he just chose it because he liked the name better than the word Republican. But later he realized that both parties had the same position on the question of slavery. So he chose the Democratic Party because it welcomed newcomers from overseas, appealed to him for superficial reasons, reminded him of political parties in Scotland, maintained flexible positions on certain issues. So it's B, right? There was a charm to the name. It was a rather superficial reason for why he chose the Democratic Party over the Republican Party. It wasn't because the party welcomed newcomers or because it reminded him of political parties from back home or because it was flexible. In fact, he goes on to say that both parties had the same inflexible position on slavery. As used in lines 34 to 35, the phrase swayed an iron rod over serves mainly to characterize the, so this line, right? In one thing, the parties agreed in trying which could stoop the lowest to gain the favor of the most cursed system of slavery that ever swayed an iron rod over any nation. So to sway an iron rod is to kind of imply the extent of slavery in the US system, right? How strong it was, how powerful the slave owners were, and how difficult it was for the slaves to escape. So there was an entire ecosystem in place. So to characterize the strength wielded by a single forceful individual, political influence exerted by a powerful group, control of weaker nations by a country with more authority, discrepancy between political ideals and processes. So it's B, right? The iron rod serves to explain the political influence that slave owners wielded in the United States, right? It's not about one individual, it's about the group. So A is wrong. This is not about different countries, it's about everything happening within America. So C is out. And this part is not about the discrepancy between ideals and processes, right? That is something he speaks of later. Here, when he speaks about the iron rod, he's speaking about the political power wielded by slave owners. So D is out. It can reasonably be inferred from the passage that Hossack became an abolitionist because, and is this, okay, this is not evidence-based, because he had been part of the successful abolitionist movement in Scotland. Participation in the Democratic Party made him aware of the injustice of slavery. Anti-slavery activism helped him adjust to his new country. Slavery was another form of an unjust social system that he already opposed. Okay, so I think the answer would be D, because he says here these lines, right? As a man who had fled from the crushing aristocracy of my native land, how could I support a worse aristocracy in this land? So he clearly says that I had fled the aristocracy, the nobility, the royal hierarchy of my land. But then I came to the US and I found a worse aristocracy, the ownership of one man by another man. So how could I support that? So slavery was another form of an unjust social system that he already opposed back home. So it's D. He doesn't say that he was part of an abolitionist movement in Scotland, right? We don't know that, so A is wrong. His participation in the Democratic Party actually made him aware that the party was completely not interested in the question of slavery, right? So it's not B. And anti-slavery activism was something that he's doing now that he's harboring a fugitive slave, right? So that was not what led him to become an abolitionist in the United States. As used in line 58, profess most nearly means. So let's look at profess. This one, right? I placed myself upon the Constitution in the presence of a nation who have the Declaration of Independence read to them every 4th of July and profess to believe it, right? So we profess, we claim to believe it, even though some of our actions go against it, right? So profess, the best word would be claim. We claim, right? So that's also an option. To confess is to kind of agree or say something in private. So that doesn't apply here in the context of the nation professing, claiming to believe in the words of the Declaration of Independence. It's not instruct, it's not about teaching someone, and decline doesn't make sense in context. So it's A. Which choice most clearly suggests that in Hossack's view, those who willfully distort the core principles of the US should be considered criminals? Okay, 55 to 58, 58 to 62, 55 to 58. So this part, yeah, 58 to 62. So this part, 62 to 66 and 68 to 69. 62 to 66 and 68 to 69. Okay, so which part is evidence for those who distort the principles of the Constitution? They should be considered criminals. Option A, I placed myself upon the Constitution in the presence of a nation who have the Declaration read to them. No, so this doesn't speak about those who distort it, so it's not A. Yes, in the presence of civilized man, I hold up the Constitution of my adopted country as clear from the blood of men and from a tyranny that would have made crowned heads blush. So again, he is speaking of the Constitution and his allegiance to it, not about those who distort it. The parties who bend the Constitution to the support of slavery are traitors. Traitors not only to the liberties of millions of enslaved countrymen, but traitors to the Constitution itself, which they have sworn to support. So this is the best answer, right? Option C, because here he's saying that Those, the slave owners who use the constitution to justify this abominable practice of slavery, they are the ones who are traitors to the country. They are the real criminals. So it's C. And I go, sir, to the constitution of my country. The word slave is not to be found. Yeah, so this again speaks of his reading of the constitution. So this is not the answer, it's C. Okay, it can most reasonably be inferred from the passage that Hosek regards the authors of the founding documents of the United States to be, and this is evidence pair 66 to 68, 69 to 75, 66 to 68, 69 to 75, okay, and 75 to 80, 80 to 84. Okay, so these are the evidence that I'm looking at. So it can most reasonably be inferred that Hosek regards the authors of the founding documents to be well-meaning men who offered proposals that they feared would be difficult to implement, ambitious men who hoped to change the world with their far-reaching pronouncements, virtuous men who intended to reflect the actual practice of important ideals, calculating men who made promises that would benefit them politically. So this is C, right? Because we know that towards the end of the passage, he says that, can it be, sir, that these great men, the writers of the Constitution, under cover of those hallowed words, intended to make a government that should outrage justice and trample upon liberty? So he's saying that the founders were virtuous men who wanted to reflect the actual practice of important ideals. They wanted their words to be put into practice. So it's C. Well-meaning men who offered proposals that they feared. So there's no mention of their fear that these proposals would be difficult to implement. Ambitious men who hope to change the world. There's no mention of changing the world. It's only about how they wanted their ideals to be implemented. And calculating men who made promises that would benefit them. No. Hosek presents them as virtuous, as highly regarded, not calculating. So I already think that D should be the evidence for this, but let's just quickly go through the other options. So option A, a foreigner upon your soil, I go not to the platforms of contending parties to find the truth. So this talks about how he approaches the Constitution, not about the founding fathers. I go, sir, to the Constitution of my country. The word slave is not to be found. I read, we the people of the US, in order to form a more perfect union. So this is about the words of the Constitution. So this is not relevant. These were the men who had proclaimed to the world that all men were created equal, that they were endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, and condemned it even unto death. So this is the summary of the Constitution, right? This is the summary of what the Constitution says as written by the founding fathers, right? But this is not the best evidence for my answer, because my answer is saying that these were virtuous men who wanted their words to be implemented in practice. So that is what he's saying in the last lines, right? That how could these men who had written such hallowed words be okay with the system of slavery that obtains in the US today? So D is a better answer than option C. Right. So I think that was the last question. Let's grade this. Starting from 11. D, B, A, B, B. D, B, A, B, B. D, A, C, C, D. D, A, C, C, D. Okay, great. So we got all correct. Hope this exercise was useful. Hit like and subscribe to the channel to receive notifications of future uploads. I'll see you in a new video soon. Take care. Bye-bye.